I want to talk first about an announcement you made today with Bleacher Report about how people may be consuming games in smaller chunks. Tell us about that.
So the idea with Bleacher Report is right now you can only buy a single game. I mean, it used to be you had to buy the entire package of games, but then we morphed that into a single game package. But then there was a realization that for some people, when your game is 2.5 hours long, may only have 15 minutes around the beginning of the game, and then they know they have to go offline because they have to go into a dinner or something else. Or maybe during a game, they see a tweet or there's something on Instagram that says, Russell Westbrook's going for another triple-double, and so now I just want to see.
And they want to jump in.
And they want to jump in. So the notion is, from a fan standpoint, they're thinking, why should I pay full price if I'm only going to watch 5 or 10 minutes of a game? So we've taken the idea of microtransactions that they use in video games and other forms of media and said, why can't you buy a portion of a game here? So with great Bleacher Report technology and with our partners at Turner, we're going to make this available next season.
And I would imagine that a lot of this will be consumed on mobile. Is that right? And is that how people tend to be watching games?
Absolutely. I think in this case, the vast majority will be mobile, either a phone or a tablet of some sort. And it's designed for people who are moving around. It's not necessarily something you'll be doing in your living room, although potentially you'd have that same opportunity. But exactly, you're in a cab somewhere here in New York, and you're on your way to an event at night. The Knicks game starts at 7:30. There's a half hour or a portion of the game that you're able to watch before your event, and rather than buying the whole game, and we're still working on pricing, but the notion is for 99 cents you can watch 5 minutes of the game or 10 minutes of the game.
All eyes, or a lot of eyes, from a sports perspective, are on Washington right now, and specifically the Supreme Court over a decision around gambling on sports. You've been pretty clear to date about what you think about it. Where does it go from here, obviously depending on the decision that comes
Well,
down?
Not to use a betting metaphor, but the odds seem to be out there that the current federal statute, PASPA, will be overturned by the Supreme Court, and that therefore there will be no federal prohibition on sports betting. It won't automatically make it legal. It will mean that it will now be up to states to regulate it as they see fit. But in anticipation of the Supreme Court overturning this law, roughly 20 states are actively considering sports betting legislation right now. So we've engaged in the discussion. As you mentioned, I had taken the position several years ago that I thought we should have a legalized federal framework for sports betting. I never anticipated it would happen this way, that the Supreme Court would be overturning existing law, but I think it's ultimately a positive thing. We know there's an enormous amount of underground sports betting going on, measured in the hundreds of billions of dollars in the United States alone, and our view is both from an integrity standpoint and a regulatory standpoint, and ultimately for states and federal jurisdictions to raise tax, it should be a regulated industry. So we're very much engaged in these discussions state by state right now.
And help me understand sort of the economics of it from a league standpoint, and how are owners thinking about it as this moves forward?
Well, from a league standpoint, we've proposed something in the model legislation which we're referring to as an integrity fee. In essence, but it could also be viewed as a royalty. It's our view. The NBA, for example, is going to spend roughly $7.5 billion just this season producing our games. And our view is we should be compensated as the intellectual property creators for this content. In addition, we're going to have substantially increased costs around integrity because, I mean, the good news is that it will be a regulated, transparent market. But for us, it means that we now will have the ability to regulate things in the ways we haven't historically, but there'll be enormous expense that comes with that regulation. So we think both because our additional expenses, but also not to hide behind it, that just the expenses, we're creating this intellectual property and we should be compensated. But it'll also, for us, benefit in terms of engagement. I don't want to hide from that either. The notion is that, and most bets, we follow it internationally, in Europe especially, where it's a regulated jurisdiction, most bets are relatively small, and so it's not an issue of problem gambling. We have to watch out for that too, but the notion is if you have $5 or $10 on the game, you're that much more engaged in it, and especially there's all kinds of in-play betting where you're betting on particular quarter scores or whether a player is going to make the 2 free throws. There could be all kinds of combinations of betting.
The NBA has been very attractive to a lot of people in the financial world, be it from private equity, from hedge funds. We talked to some of them today. No teams currently for sale, at least as a whole, some stakes here and there. But how are you seeing valuations, and how is the sort of demand on the financial side for NBA franchises at this point?
The valuations are skyrocketing, and as you said, a lot of the investors are very sophisticated financial investors as well. I mean, I think it's not certainly just a financial financial investment for them. It's also investment based on love and passion for the game, but it's been a really robust market. I mean, sometimes I wish I had more teams to sell because I get a lot of calls from wealthy individuals who would be interested in acquiring NBA teams or stakes in NBA teams. But right now, as you said, there's no team that's actively for sale at the moment. The Brooklyn Nets transaction hasn't closed yet, but there you have Joe Tsai, one of the co-founders of Alibaba, buying a 50% stake in the team and a path to control. So we're very excited to bring him to the NBA, also because, of course, his knowledge of the Chinese market as well.
Right. And since you mentioned that, what is the state of that? There was some expectation to be closed by now. What should we be looking for?
The state is, I'm told by all parties, that they're very close to closing. I mean, in a matter of less than a month.
Right. You mentioned insights into China and international. What are your expansion plans at this point? As you take in all that incoming interest, how do you see taking advantage of that?
Well, beginning the NBA as a media company, even the Bleacher Report example we started with, I think our League Pass package selling digital games around the world is growing exponentially. I think as you see the quality of video on cell phones, as you see the distribution of smartphones increase all around the world, it makes that games that much more accessible. This is my 26th year at the NBA, and years ago when I sold international programming, you really were limited to prime time for the most part. That's when people were going to consume sports and on weekends. And now take China, for example, where there's a 12-hour difference from the East Coast. We have a huge business during commute time for people in the morning, however, whether they're taking public transportation or sitting down at their desk early in the morning, they're able to watch our games on their phones, their tablets, or their PCs. So it's become a big business in a place where I would have never anticipated. I mean, and then we're dealing with other time zone issues around the world. It may be the case ultimately in Europe, for example, where our prime time in the States is the middle of the night in Europe, that as our business grows, it may make sense for teams to occasionally play in the afternoon. You can imagine a Knicks game at, occasionally once every 2 months at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, knowing that you're going to reach a large audience in Europe.